Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Birmingham in '63, it's like one of those moments in history that just sticks with you. And we're diving deep into that today, specifically your request to really get the Birmingham Campaign. Like, how did this one city become such a turning point in the civil rights movement?
Oh.
And we've got this fascinating podcast episode you sent, so let's unpack it.
Yeah, it's a story that, while it's focused on Birmingham, it really kind of sums up the whole, strategic genius of the civil rights movement. It wasn't just about, changing one city, right? It was about changing the nation.
And they picked quite the city to make their point, right? I mean, wasn't it Martin Luther King Jr. himself who called Birmingham the most segregated city in America? That wasn't just by chance, was it?
Oh, absolutely not. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC, they chose Birmingham on purpose. It was a calculated risk, you could say, a very deliberately staged confrontation, all to expose just how brutal segregation really was. And they wanted the whole world to see it.
Okay, so they wanted a reaction, and with Bull Connor, they definitely got one. For those who don't know, he was Birmingham's public safety commissioner, and even back then, this guy was notorious for brutal tactics.
Yeah, Connor was, well, infamous is putting it mildly. He was like a symbol of everything the movement was fighting against. Completely committed to keeping things segregated no matter what, even if it meant using violence. King and the SCLC, they knew exactly who they were dealing with.
So how did they plan to use that to their advantage? They knew Connor would react violently, but what was the strategy?
Media, my friend. They understood the power of media, especially at that time, with television becoming more and more influential. The Freedom Rides, a couple of years earlier, had shown how powerful images of, white mobs attacking peaceful protesters could be. They were hoping to recreate that impact, but on an even larger scale.
So they were basically using Connor's predictable brutality to create a spectacle, something the nation, the whole world even, couldn't ignore.
Precisely. And they knew what kind of images would cut through all the noise and really grab people's attention. Images of children attacked and brutalized just for wanting basic human rights, the same rights as their white peers. That's what they were aiming for.
Which leads us to, of course, the Children's Crusade, May 2nd, 1963. Over 1,000 young people, some as young as 6 years old, marching for their right to a decent education, to eat at a lunch counter, just to exist with the same freedoms as any other kid.
And Connor's response, brutal, as expected. Fire hoses, powerful enough to knock a person down, turned on children. Police dogs, attacking kids. These were images of state-sanctioned violence, terrorism really, directed at its own citizens, and children no less.
It's just unimaginable what those children went through. Did King and the SCLC, could they have anticipated that level of violence, even from Connor?
It's hard to say for sure, but prepared. Oh yeah, they definitely were prepared for a violent response. What they probably didn't expect was the sheer brutality of it, the level of force Connor was willing to use against kids. And that's what made those images so shocking, so impossible to ignore for people all over the world.
Those images that came out of Birmingham, it wasn't just America that saw them, right?
Yeah.
This podcast we're talking about, it mentions how this went global. Did King and the SCLC, did they even imagine that back then, reaching the whole world?
Well, it's clear they knew how powerful the media was, especially then with the whole Cold War thing going on. America, they're trying to be all, we're the good guys, freedom and democracy.
Right.
Then suddenly, bam, the world sees this.
Yeah, not a good look at all. The podcast host, I think it was Mr. Hutchings, he said something really chilling about how these images, they played right into, Soviet propaganda.
Oh, absolutely. The Soviets and anyone siding with them, they ate this up. Here's America, supposed to be the leader of the free world, and they're beating up their own people just because of their skin color. Totally wrecked America's image on the world stage.
Talk about a PR disaster, right? It wasn't just some local problem anymore. It's an international embarrassment. So Kennedy, he had to feel the pressure to do something, right?
And he did, but I gotta say, he was hesitant at first. You gotta remember, Kennedy's walking a tightrope here. He needs those Southern Democrats, to get his plans passed in Congress. But at the same time, the whole world's watching, waiting to see what he'll do about this injustice.
So what'd he do? What were his first moves after Birmingham?
June '63, just a month after those kids marched, Kennedy gets on TV, national address, and lays it out there. He says, we need serious civil rights laws now. It was a big move, a real sign that the government was finally starting to take this seriously.
I mean, that wasn't just some political move, right? That felt different, like a moral turning point.
Absolutely. Kennedy, he was changed by what he saw in Birmingham. by how outraged the world was. When he spoke, man, you could feel the weight of it. People felt that.
And did anything actually change in Birmingham because of that speech?
Change. It's never fast, right? But things started moving. Kennedy's speech, all that pressure from activists, the world watching. The government started pushing harder on the South. The Supreme Court even stepped in, said Birmingham segregation laws, they're gone, out of here. That was huge, for dismantling that whole system.
What about Birmingham itself, though? After those protests, after the world looked away, what happened?
Even with the laws changing, the fight was far from over, believe me. September 63, just a few months later, the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, 4 little girls, gone, just like that.
It just breaks your heart, doesn't it? Makes you think, if those images from the Children's Crusade didn't change everyone's hearts, what will?
It's a harsh lesson, Laws can change, but changing hearts and minds, that's a whole other fight, a much longer one.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About how change, well, it's not always straightforward. You win some battles, but the war, the fight for real equality, that's something else entirely.
It's sobering, no doubt about it. And that bombing, the 16th Street Baptist Church, that just drives it home. I mean, think about it. This horrific act, violence against innocent children, and it happened just months after the whole world was watching Birmingham. Makes you wonder.
Yeah, did people really see those images? The Children's Crusade, the hoses, the dogs. Did it sink in at all if that kind of hate was still so strong?
Well, remember, change happens on different levels, right? Those images, they sparked outrage, definitely got the ball rolling on some laws, but changing how people really feel deep down, dismantling systems that have been around for centuries, that takes time, a long time.
This podcast, it says Birmingham was like a spark, though, right? Didn't it light a fire under the whole movement, more than just laws changing?
Absolutely. Think about what came after. A few months after the Children's Crusade, you have the March on Washington, 250,000 people. King gives his I Have a Dream speech, which, come on, everyone knows that speech. Birmingham fueled that, no doubt about it.
It's strange, isn't it? Awful things happen, but it feels like that's what gave the movement the energy it needed to push forward.
Yeah, it's like Birmingham forced everyone to really see what was happening, couldn't ignore it anymore, couldn't pretend they didn't know. That shift, that's what was needed for the big wins that came later, I think.
You're talking about the Civil Rights Act, 1964.
Exactly. Less than a year after those kids faced down those hoses, those dogs, you have the biggest civil rights law in American history. You can't separate that win from Birmingham. No way.
It's an incredible legacy. But like you said before, it's a process, not just one moment. And we're still dealing with some of these same things today, aren't we?
100%. And that's why we can't forget these stories. Those who marched, the way they fought, the fact that this fight's been going on for so long. Birmingham reminds us that things can change, but we gotta stay aware, keep learning, and be ready to stand up when we see things that are wrong, wherever we see them.
That's a powerful message. Something for us all to think about. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us into Birmingham 63. It's going to stick with me for a while.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.